Gabby, you've called in amazing women in the Lost Commanders community.
Oh my god, yes, Jamie.
I want to know more about how they made it.
Yes, right? They're real stories. Where the idea for their business came from, how they invested in it, how they got their clients.
I think this is a podcast.
Well, fairy godmother, you're hosting it.
Do you dream about me?
Welcome to anybody watching. Welcome to our latest edition of Lunch Break. If you are new to these conversations, over the quarantine, the beginning of the quarantine, I should say, be specific, we were having these daily conversations for over a month, really to dive into topics that we thought were of interest and especially like during that moment in time. And with the recent racial uprising movement, we have, as a community, really been committed to not having it be like a trendy or momentary thing, but really understanding how as a community we can integrate what's happening, we can process it and move forward with commitment to what this movement stands for. And so over the past few weeks and in the upcoming weeks, we will continue to have more deep dive conversations into sort of the different aspects that these this racial justice uprising movement has brought forth. And so today we are sitting down with Kamala to have a conversation about conversations. So we are going to talk about how to have these transformational conversations with people. And I know that this has been a particularly topic of interest, I think, with a lot of our community. But before we dive in, I do want to just read a little bit about this amazing woman who I have been friends with for about 5 years and I'm very excited about. So Kamalah Fletcher describes herself as a compulsive connector, which is exactly what she is, and rarely comes across a problem she doesn't have an idea how to solve. She is a community engagement and now disaster response entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Kamalah prioritizes cultivating deep and trusted relationships with various stakeholders across sectors, both as a practitioner and an active community member. She's worked on county, state, and nationwide initiatives focused on network weaving, capacity building, community leadership development, prosperity, and community-based disaster resilience. Her specific expertise focuses on those who experience higher than normal vulnerability to disasters that are both natural and man-made. Kamalah is a former board member of Florida Prosperity Partnership and currently sits on the boards of the Miami Worker Center and Neighborhood Housing Services of South Florida. She is a pet mama, proud auntie, and all-around wonderful human being. And we are very excited to have you.
Thank you, Gabby.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I want to also share just a little bit of a personal anecdote. I met Kamalah through a leadership program that is now known as Miami's Next Leaders. The program is technically national, but this is about our Miami chapter. And Kamalah had gone through that program years earlier. And this was over 5 years ago, and I remember so vividly that she came on. We were a group of fellows. I think there must have been like about 20 of us in the room, and Kamalah was brought on to lead a session on us becoming more comfortable with our differences and being able to speak into them in a way that wasn't that didn't feel threatening, but that was celebrating of those differences and was acknowledging of them. And it's kind of amazing. I feel like if anybody watching has ever been through a similar experience, you know that that's the kind of thing that really stays with you if it's done really well. And so as it was, Kamalah immediately came to mind as somebody that I think that is a great person to really dive into that, because I think we're feeling a very interesting wave of that right now, that people are kind of more acutely aware of the differences, not only of just life circumstances, but also of opinion and beliefs. And sort of like these differences are sort of bubbling up very intensely with a lot of emotions right now. And most of us are finding ourselves at a loss for how to handle that experience. So that's kind of a little bit where we are going to go with this conversation. Just a reminder that if you have questions, you can always just add them to the comments, and as possible, we will just weave them in. But is there anything that you'd like to add kind of going into this, Kamala, or should we just dive right into the question?
Well, no, thank you so much, Gabby. And I do remember that conversation, and that leadership program was such a significant part of my life. I moved back to Miami to be close to my family. I was nonprofit burnt out to the 47th power. And I worked at Starbucks for a couple of years, and I was just like, I don't want to do anything where I'm going to feel like I'm going to be working like 24 hours a day and, overly, like I wanted a job where I was like, I just want to go home and not think about work. So anyway, that didn't last too long. And I was like, oh, I think it's time to get back into the nonprofits. And so, I got connected to Catalyst. I was a public ally, and that program came along, and it was just this moment where I felt like I found my tribe.
Yeah.
And I felt like I walked into that room. I didn't really know anybody, but I knew on some level why we were there. I remember even the interviewing process, like you sort of look around the room and you sort of make assumptions on who you think is going to get in. And then you show up on the day and it's like all the people that you love and gelled with. And I remember feeling like I love all of these people instantly. And I would fall on a sword for them. And this is my family.
Yes.
And so I would try to participate every year. I at least would be, part of the curriculum committee, et cetera. But this was a moment where I was like, oh, I haven't met these folks and they don't know that I love them already. And they don't know that we love each other all. And that they may not know yet that this is a family. And so, and I think there might have been some like challenging relationships. I don't remember exactly what was going on, but I know that what I felt compelled to talk to you guys about was sort of like how I've dealt with differences in my life. And, my family's from Jamaica. When you come from a former colony, and, there's all kinds of complicated issues. And I feel lucky enough to know, some of my history to my great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, but that's connected to being the oppressed and the oppressor all in one body, right? So, my great-great-grandfather moved to Jamaica to work on his uncle's plantation, and it was told to me as a very romantic story. And then I learned about things, and I was just like, I wonder what more of the details were about that. Yeah.
Yes.
And, I have family members that we don't all agree politically. Yeah. We don't all have the same background. We don't make the same choices about how we want to live our lives. We don't feel the same about color. We don't feel the same about how you style your hair. But I feel like with my family or people that I consider family, I'm inextricably connected to them. And so for me, I feel like I can't throw them away.
Yeah.
There's just going to be places we're going to have to agree to disagree and move on. And I can still love you because I believe in the beautiful perfection of nature. I believe in everyone's humanity, and I believe in everybody's desire to have their life as a human being. And so that's where you start with me. And so all of the other stuff, isn't going to take away from your humanity. Yeah. And so as much as I can impart that on people or share, and I never want to try to convince somebody. I can only present how I feel about things. But also I have learned in my life that when you are transparent, when you are honest, when you expose yourself to things that are raw that you don't even want to admit to yourself, that is a thing that brings comfort and grace to people, because everybody's got those things in there that they're hiding from everybody in their life. And when people, and the way that I've learned to share and the way that I've learned to release myself of those things is from people who have done the same thing with me. And so that is how I try to operate in the world, that, a lot of people will get way more details about what's going on in my life and my day than they may ever want to. But if you ask me how I am, you're going to find out how I am.
Yeah.
And so, and I want people to have some space in the world. I've been saved because I've had people in my life who I could tell anything to, my deepest, most shameful thing to my greatest joy. And I would not have survived without that. And so if that's what I got and that's what saved me, then I'm always going to offer it to the world. For anybody, you know, they always say like your audience is waiting for you to show up to them and to say something. And so I need my audience to always know that I'm here to say something to them, and then they can talk to me too. So that is where that came from. And that is how I'm kind of living in this moment. Although it might be a little bit more complicated now, but you know, that's just that's my thing. That's my mantra. That's how I try to go around the world.
Yes, and that is something that I feel like it's Kamala's one of those people that I think after you watch this live, you're gonna want to be friends with her, because she's the kind of person that like this level of just authenticity and openness is what you get from her in any setting at any time. Like you're not getting different versions of this person. Like this is it, and it's very clear that this is how you show up in the world, and it's very inspiring. I think what you were saying in particular about kind of how we mirror vulnerability to one another, I think is a beautiful place to kick off this conversation and about our humanity. And it's interesting because last night we were having the book club conversation about how to be an anti-racist. And one of the things that kept emerging is that anti-racist work is about reclaiming and coming home to our humanity. It is about really seeing everyone, every person for their full human experience, and having empathy and sort of being there with that person. And I think that where things have gotten a little murky lately is in this like realization of all of the factors and the history and the context that has always been present in these relationships, even with the best of intentions to acknowledge differences and sort of be there with each other. A lot of people have been living in blissful ignorance of the true experience of Black people, and that is becoming a little harder to ignore these days, to just kind of say the least. And so as we talk about how we come with this intention of vulnerability and openness and authenticity to a conversation where we are acknowledging each other's humanities, one of the things that we talked about kind of preparing for today was this idea of safe spaces. And I want to be really honest. I feel like I have had a limited understanding of what that meant. And I feel like I felt like I had to create that for people. And without even really processing all that quote unquote safe means, right? Like that if you come here, like you are going to be in a safe space, which means that you're not going to get offended, feel bad, come across a difference with someone, in a space where we're actually claiming to celebrate differences and your uniqueness. The differences will come up, and that will like result in conflict. And so let's talk about what safe spaces mean and what your thoughts are on those, and like what does the alternative look like?
You know, when I first began like facilitation, right? And so one of the things that you learn is like create ground rules and create the safe space, right? Let the folks in the session, and when I was first doing it was around teaching college students how to be early childhood folks. And so putting people in a place where they could learn and feel all right with that learning. And so as you were talking, I remember, I was like, where does it root for me? What is my first memory of it? And I think, you know, because I think as we were preparing before, I was just like, you know, I don't really believe in safe spaces, right? And I remember, I think I used to just say it kind of as, you know, this is the script, and I'm going to give you my legitimacy and why you should listen to me, and then I'm going to create a safe space. And so then I remember someone challenged me once in a training, and just like, how you gonna make a safe space? How you gonna make everybody in here feel safe? And I was just like, that is a great point, you know? And it's because safety is gonna mean something different for everybody. And I remember, so I was like, okay, well, what does safety mean to me? So I remember when I was a little kid, the biggest thing in my family with my parents was honesty and truth. I want the truth. I don't care what the truth is. You can't be afraid to tell me what the truth is, because number one, I'm gonna find it out eventually. And number two, that's always gonna be your best bet.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you there's no consequences for it. Just because you tell me the truth, it doesn't mean you're not gonna get punished. But telling me the truth is gonna keep my respect, is gonna keep my trust. And what you need as my child is my trust, because you don't wanna live that life if I don't trust you. And I learned that later too, right? And so, and then my parents proved it to me every time. So I would do something wrong. They say, did you do it? I would say, yes, I did. We'd have a conversation, or I'd get a spanking, or I'd get yelled at. And for me, getting yelled at was worse than the spanking. And then, especially with my mother, I would test it out. And so I'd call her name, and then she'd say, yeah? Like we had not just been discussing what I thought was the worst thing that I ever did in my whole life. And I was like, wow, my mother has moved on. I'm still there, but she's gone past. So I was like, oh, maybe I should move on too. This is still my mother. She still loves me despite what just happened. And so if I'm going to offer anybody something that could be considered a safe space, all I'm going to offer you is being very clear about the rules. I can say that this is a place where we're going to allow there to be truth. You're going to hear some things that are going to sting, and we'll try to deal with that at some point. But this is a place where you can say it. However, you got to own the impact of, right? So what do we call it? Assume positive intent, but own your impact, right?
Assume positive intent, but own your impact. Okay.
Right? So as a listener, I'm not going to assume that somebody hates me, that they're trying to come after me, and that this is all about making me feel uncomfortable. But if I'm speaking, I'm also going to understand that I'm going to be careful and choose my words properly. I'm going to give my truth, and it might come back to me in a way that I didn't intend. And then that's just part of being people, and that's part of moving forward in a conversation. And so in terms of safety, all I can promise you is the safety of enforcing these rules that we have set in this space. That is the safety. The safety is not that your feelings are not going to get hurt. The safety is not that you're never going to be uncomfortable, or that you're going to be so excited to be in this room for every minute. The safety is, here's what you can expect, and you can expect it.
Yeah.
And that's it. So, maybe I won't say that I can't say that we can create safe spaces, but I can't create a universally safe space. But I can tell you what safety is going to mean here. I can maybe ask you what you need to feel safe. If we can see if together we can agree that that's something that we can do. And if there's something that you need to feel safe, you have to say it.
Yes.
You can't hold people accountable to, right? It's like everybody's not a mind reader. So this is your moment. If there's something you need, you got to say it now. And if you didn't say it, that's not something that we can be accountable to, right? And so that is something I think that's really important. But the other thing about facilitation, because facilitation is really a gift, right? If you're going to facilitate, it's to make easy, right? So if I'm going to be the facilitator of a process or a conversation, then I'm here to say, I'm going to be the person that's holding those rules for you. And I'm going to make sure that everybody's heard. And I'm going to watch for the vibes, right? I'm going to watch for the unspoken conversation. I'm going to watch for the conversations that are happening with people's eyes that they're not saying, right? But the best facilitator is somebody that doesn't have any skin in the game, right? It's a neutral party.
Yeah.
So in this moment where it's all about who we are as people, a facilitator is going to have to, sacrifice a lot for the productivity of the conversation, we'll say, maybe,
Yeah.
And so I think in my desire, like sometimes I'll say what I really feel like I want to do in this moment is just slow everything down, because sometimes you need a second to figure, maybe you've never thought about what makes you feel safe. Maybe until somebody asks you, you didn't know that you've never felt safe, and that you don't even know how to ask, right? Like,
or that you had a say in that process, right?
Exactly, right? Like I have trouble asking for help, right? I'm the oldest child. My parents used to say, do this. And I'm like, all right, somebody told me to do something. I better figure out how to do it, right? So then I get into work situations and people are like, tell me how I can help you. You know, what can I do to support you? I was like, I don't know.
I'm the oldest, I do it all.
I was like, tell me what other people have said. If maybe that's something that I think I might want to. I don't know what to do, how to ask for help. Somebody's supposed to help me? Now, you know, I'm gonna get shit for this later. You know, my family was like, we help you plenty, you know, but but I was just like, I don't know what I'm not used to having resources and lots of staff and stuff like that. That you tell me what you should be doing.
Yes.
What have you seen before? So
yeah, I feel like one of the things that and now realizing, kind of looking back based on what you're talking about, I've been in sometimes even like longer Zoom meetups where the guidelines for the meeting are crowdsourced, and I feel like that's really beautiful. Like, because people will say the things that need to be said, right? Like, oh, what we share here should be confidential. Oh, we should be sharing with respect and kindness. Oh, this and that. So really not overlooking that step, not overlooking saying these things out loud before diving into that kind of conversation. Because I think I really loved what you also said about assuming that people have good intentions. And that if something kind of makes you feel a certain type of way, that person's intention wasn't like to hurt you, right? It was just something that kind of triggered something in you, and we get to discuss it, which I think is really interesting. The other piece of it that I know we talked about and you've mentioned was this idea of like, we're having this conversation in service of a goal. And I think that that's interesting, and I think a little more nuanced these days, right? Like, because I feel like people, the reality is, and maybe like this is how it comes up, because in terms of the guidelines and the goal, like, what are some things, like, can you also say like these things will not be debatable, right? Like, we are not going to debate whether the lives of Black people matter. We are not going to debate whether the lives of trans people matter. Like kind of like those get to be part of the guidelines as well, right?
Yeah, and you get to opt out.
Yes.
If you cannot say that I can agree to this, don't participate, right? But if you want to agree, if you say that logically, that feels like something that, even if you're just saying that's something I should agree to, right? Then you get yourself ready for it. And if you opt out, you also get yourself ready for what it's going to look like, because people are going to notice that you opt out, and there's going to be consequences for that too. Yeah. But I think, and this is also like me personally, if you opt out, I'm not questioning your humanity. Yeah. I'm going to know that we don't agree on this place. I'm going to know that I don't want to deal with you. I'm going to know that I need to keep my eye on you, because I have seen you voted with your feet, and I know what you represent. So when I see you in a place where you might have some opportunity to hurt a person that I know fits into one of those categories, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to get closer, and I'm going to maybe intervene because I already know who you are. Right? And so I think something you said was so important about these agreements, right? So our society, everything, all our systems are just agreements. We just agree that this is something that we're going to do. And so pace is important, right? We set a meeting for an hour without any thought to whether or not the things that we're trying to accomplish in this gathering together can actually be accomplished in an hour. Yeah. One thing that I learned from my friends and my people in the LGBT community was around when I was introduced to checking in culture. I was like, what? Well, we take a moment, we check and ask people what their pronouns are, and we ask about this and what do you want to, and how do you identify and stuff like that. I was like, I'm gonna need a second to digest what you just told me, because oh my gosh, right? But then I was like, wait a minute, because you absolutely, I want you to pronounce my name properly. My name is Kamala. Now, I love everybody, so I will accept the Camilla and the Carmela and the Canolas, right? Out of kindness, but I want my name to be said. And so if I say it, and these are the things that were asked me, and I appreciate being asked. So that's important to me. So all of the things that are important to you you're allowed for those to be important to you. And you have to take the time, but nothing about our lives, nothing about our systems, nothing about our work often allows for that time of establishing all these building blocks that intellectually and in theory we know are true, but somehow when it's a moment to put it into practice, we leave it out. It causes problems later. We don't understand why we're in this problem. Everybody's judging each other for why they didn't know that what was supposed to do, when we never agreed on the common language, agreed on the definitions, right? When we said we're going to do respect and kindness, my idea of respect and kindness may not be your idea of respect and kindness. So now we need to take a second to say, what is respect and kindness?
What does that mean?
And everybody in the conversation is going to be like,
yeah,
oh
Sandra
my
put
God.
in the comments, she said safety is different for everyone.
Yeah.
So I feel like this respect and kindness are also different for everyone. So
and sometimes we're like, can we get to the point? And because I myself said, I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh, stab me in the face. Right? But it ends up being important and you end up benefiting from taking the time.
100%. And I imagine, obviously, to the extent that these are conversations that you are going to continually have with perhaps a similar group of people, that, you know, probably the first times that you go through these guidelines, it's going to take a little longer, but in the long haul, what you'll be able, you know, the progress you'll be able to make together is going to be really important. Yeah. And so I'm wondering how, because I've certainly like been in these kinds of conversations primarily in whether it's for a project or a company, like kind of in a more professional setting, but or even like in a fellowship or like with a clearer goal. But I think that definitely, like when we introduce the like family dynamic to this whole system, it feels because it is like so feelings driven. Like it is all kind of emotions and what I know about you. And I'm just really wondering, like, let's talk about like what it would look like to grab this framework and like family-ize it.
Well, you know, that's tough because sometimes in those uncomfortable moments, like I know the times when I've been at my most just like wrought and frustrated and just anxiety ridden is when I'm in a conversation and I feel like I can't get away from it. I can't get away from this person, what they want to say, why they want to be heard, etc. You know, sometimes people engage with a conversation because they're just like, this is the moment that I'm going to prove to you that you're wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And then also there's a context that we have in our families, right? So like everything that's happening in this moment brings with it everything that happened before that moment for each of those people, right? So my best example of a very challenging moment in my family was when my grandpa passed last year and he was sick for a while. And I was like, I have a group of people together who we don't really have a system for this, how we're going to be collaborative, how we're going to get together, work the schedule, how we're going to love each other, how we're going to like be able to help this person who needs help, but is I got a complicated story with this person. They were very problematic at moments, right? So I was like, I'm gonna apply all my work stuff to this, right? I was like, this group of people ain't nothing but a coalition. I know how to do a coalition. This is my job. This is my moment to shine. So I was like, okay, hey everybody, we're gonna have a conversation about coordinating this, and I'm gonna be the facilitator. And they're just like, what? And that's bullshit. And this person's not doing it, and all this other stuff. Yeah, but I was like, it's about practice.
Yeah.
It's not about this moment, us getting it right, but it's about us learning to get used to this process, right? And so for families in this moment, some folks, you're just gonna have to be like, I must enforce my boundaries, right? Because not everybody is at that place of a wonderful process with you.
Yeah.
So you got to be really aware of your boundaries and be like, this is a time when I'm actually going to walk away. I don't care if you had more to say. I don't care if you need to feel heard because God bless you, but you don't think you were heard unless somebody agrees with you. So I'm going home. Or you engage your family and they're like, let's create it. You know, people will roll their eyes at you, but it's like, here's what I need out of this conversation. Here's the moment where I'm going to leave, right? Here's a level of emotion that I'm going to get to. Because I have people in my family that get me so worked up that I have to walk away and I have to go to sleep. Like I'm that.
You need
like,
to sleep it off.
yeah, I gotta sleep it off. And so, and you know, and especially, I don't know, because and my context is like coming from like the Caribbean culture and all of our issues with colorism and classism and all of that stuff, and so it's like getting into, and also your inner condition. Am I ready? Am I the one? Is this a time for me to be? Can I be a warrior about this in this moment? You're allowed to not be able to, but if you feel really strongly about it, you got to go figure out how to do it, because you're like, y'all are coming with me, kicking or screaming, right? But there's a lot of things to be considered, and it's really not easy. And sometimes, like, my way and the way my brain works is I'm a very objective thinker, and so the second I'm presented with something, I'm thinking of it from everybody's perspective. I'm thinking it from all angles. And I'm just like, well, what does this person need to hear to be able to agree with this? And they don't understand the analogous situations that they're both saying the same thing, right? So, but in this moment, I honestly feel very strongly that I have to choose to be quiet, because sometimes in my ability to take on other people's points of view, those people will use it as like, okay, well, this person is from that culture. This person said that they understand where I'm coming from. So now I'm right. And so I don't want in this moment anybody to ever use my words to feel like they can let themselves off the hook.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that sometimes it's not, so there's the message and there's a messenger. Mm-hmm. And in order to push and to get things through, it requires pressure, it requires consistency, it requires unrelentingness.
Yes.
So if I am not that, I'm stepping back to give the floor to the folks who are, because I know that's how things move, right? Yes. Like the other day when the banks were closed for Juneteenth, I did not realize I was going to be so irritated by it. And not because I needed to get my banking done, but I was like, the world is not actually different than it was yesterday. And all of a sudden now, Juneteenth is a holiday. And I was just like, isn't Juneteenth for Black people to get the day off? Your whole bank ain't doing work on Juneteenth.
Why people can work today.
So I was like, I'm gonna go home. I have to go home and chew on this one, because I've been staying away from the news. My work is really stressful. And so I know that anything that I really need to know in the world, somebody will call me or my job will send me an email. And other than that, I can't really digest, and I can't take all of it. I'm an empathetic person. I will absorb it like it's happening to me directly, and I got to sustain myself. But in this moment, I have been specifically silent because I want people, I know that there'll be a time, I grew up, my parents were in the military. I grew up all over the place. So I'm very fluent in, I was telling somebody yesterday, for lack of a better word, I was like, I'm fluent in resistant white people. Right? And so I've grown up where, and I did elementary school in Nebraska. I've lived in a lot of different places around a lot of different kind of people. So I have lived and been immersed in all of these cultures. So when somebody's presenting something to me, I feel like I can see all of it. And I was like, oh, I know exactly the perspective that they're coming from. I don't know their whole story, but then I can sort of like place myself in there and be like, all right, well, other people that I've dealt with like this is, what do they call it? Individualization. What does this person need to be able to receive this information and understand it on their terms and their context? Yeah. Right? So there'll be a time when that skill set is needed. There'll be moments when that skill set is needed, but using your voice and your platform right now, it's got to be pressure, I think, because people need to understand, right? Like part of what we were saying was like, I think the reason why we're constantly in this place is that we as a society have not had to suffer from the consequences of our bad decisions for long enough to really learn the lessons. So this is a time.
Please, let's dive into that. Like, I'm really interested in, because I think part of why this is so important is because we've been going around having different experiences, right? And so like, having like that sustained pain from the bad decisions has impacted people disproportionately or not impacted them at all. And so like that immediate awareness of like, let's dive into that, please. Like,
I mean, we had the housing crisis. We saw money being misused. The economy went this way, and then there was a stimulus that started to go back up, and people were like, okay. And all of the evils of that moment just evolved, right? Like somebody said that slavery wasn't abolished, it just evolved, right? And so if this is going to be the moment, like a good friend of mine said that, like, she feels that, like, as Black people, we are the generation that is going to shift the trauma, right? The experience of the trauma of slavery on our people. We're going to make the shift where hopefully it won't start to impact future generations in the same way it has all of us as former generations of slavery, right?
Yes.
And so I believe that in this moment, this is all part of it, right? Like, we're not going to have a situation where a group of people have been harmed and they make a little noise, and if you're in a position of power, you just sit and wait for them to get tired, you know, and be like, I can wait this out. I think this moment isn't going to be waited out.
Yes. And I think like one of the things that's really that we had been talking about and that is really exciting about this moment is that it does, precisely because of that, precisely because it's not a like, let's wait it out moment, because, you know, and we've been talking about all these last few weeks, the sort of almost unbelievable set of circumstances that had to happen for there to be enough sustained attention to the realities of Black people in this country, that everybody would sort of wake up so profoundly and so collectively at the same time, and is demanding that we show up in a different way, and kind of bringing it back to, I think, like we were talking about, like those opportunities for white and white passing people right now to really kind of like dig into the rabbit hole of understanding what's really going on. And I do think that for many of them, and I know for many of the women in our communities, the first place where it's manifesting is like they're having this awakening, they're getting educated, and then they look to their parents or their grandparents who are in a totally different place. And I think kind of like bringing it back to that family dynamic, specifically on the subject of race, specifically for white and white passing people, how do you recommend that they go into it? And I think that it's important to acknowledge, because I feel like as you were talking, I was also thinking like there's so many things at play here, even beyond sort of the goal or the subject at hand. There's like the family dynamics that may already exist. What I have met very few people that learned how to handle conflict and how to disagree in a healthy way, in much less like express their disagreement or their like, right, with family. Then there's like whatever relational dynamic, it still exists. There's a lot of grown adults who like are around their parents and they like feel like they're 14 years old again. And so like, how do you like let's talk about like how would someone who is a grown person, or even like I feel like a lot of like the Generation Z kids are kind of teaching us how to do this right now because they're just kind of going for it with their parents. But like, how do you recommend like taking on these conversations, particularly when there is quite a bit of conflict and we don't have a lot of experience with dealing with that in a healthy way?
I mean, you know, I think so, you know, in the same way that, you know, and I think in analogies, right? So in the same way that like all voters are not a monolith, right? All Black people are not a monolith, right? So what I say is what I need, and what I do is about me, right? What I want from people is dive into your curiosity, right? The way that I learned about my own history, I was having a conversation with some coworkers yesterday, and just like, it took me a long time to learn about my culture, right? And so you're not going to learn it overnight. You can't just say like, hey, solve this for me. Tell me about all of the things, right? So in the same way that I dug, the same way that I know about your culture, the same way that I spent all of my learning years learning about the, you know, the standard culture, is the same thing that you're gonna have to do to learn about my culture. Because you didn't realize all this time that we were all, right? Like our American culture, our Western hemisphere culture is made up of all of the every culture in it is part of the larger culture. And so, so if you're gonna ask me where to start, I say start in your place of curiosity. Now, when we're dealing with our family members, like the biggest thing that I've had to tap into and learn how to do is this idea of like your reaction to things teaches people how to treat you. So I may not be able to engage in a conversation.
Can you say that again? I feel like that's really powerful.
So your reaction to things teaches people how to treat you.
Okay.
And so I may not be able to engage somebody in my family, for instance, in a conversation over the impact of, you know, internalized racism and how colonialism did that to us and all of our systems in Jamaica, and then what that does to me as a person in parts of my family where my skin is darker and my hair is a different texture than other people, and how I get treated because of that, and how they didn't realize I get treated because of that, and then microaggressions and things that they might say, right? So I may not win in a conversation, but I can say, if in a moment when it's happening, I'd be like, I don't appreciate that. It makes me feel this way, and I'm walking away. Because the thing that is valuable to that person is their relationship with me.
Yes.
Right? The people who love me want me around. They want to have a connection to me. They want to be able to support me. And in the moments when they need something that I know how to do, that I'm great at, they want me to support them. And if you can't understand my perspective, you can't respect my wishes, you will lose all of those things. Yes. I got to be ready to take it away from them. I got to be ready to sacrifice the things that I also need, because I need them to understand how to treat me. Yeah. And so my reaction is to walk away from you and to deprive you of my presence in this relationship until my needs are also met by it, right? So sometimes it's going to be in a conversation and I'm going to bring facts and figures and I'm going to say, don't you understand? And sometimes it's going to be, it's impacting me as a person. When you say that, it hurts the people that I love. You're talking about people that I know and love. You're talking about friends that I've brought to this house. You're talking about people that I love, are good to me, have taken care of me, have saved me, have supported me, have offered me, have helped you and you didn't even know it. And right now you're shitting all over them, and I'm not going to stand for it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it very plainly, right? I do not like conflict. So, you know, like I have family members that they don't know how to talk to you if they're not talking about your weight. You gained weight, you lost weight. Oh, you're looking great. Oh, da, 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 da. I'm just like,
oh yeah,
if we have nothing, yeah. And
that happens a lot.
I've had to leave a couple of parties, and I've had to, you know, a couple of uncles, and be like, if you don't have anything to talk to me about besides my weight, then we don't have anything to talk about, and I'll see you next time. And I go home.
Woof. No,
right?
How many parties would be cut short right now?
Only a couple, because I'm not that brave, you know. But it's you know, those are the things that I've had to learn. I've had to get in my internal condition. I've had to be like, what can you tap into to really draw the line here, and let your family know that this is not acceptable anymore, you know. And it's going to be a gradual process, right? It's not going to happen these problems didn't get created overnight. They're not going to get solved overnight.
Yeah.
But every action, there's not going to be a time when you're not going to know what my expectation of you is.
Yes.
And sometimes that's where you start, and then it can grow from there.
Yes.
You know, you don't know how much braver you can get. You don't know how much more you can sustain. You don't know how many conversations that you can hang in there for 5 more minutes before you have to go to sleep.
Yeah. I think one thing that's coming to mind with the way that I've been experiencing this, and I have like a kind of a unique situation, because my parents have only gotten more progressive as they get older. So like I'm in one of those weird boats where they're like, yes, every day a little bit more. But one of the things, especially with my father, that I've like been really pleasantly surprised at is his openness and willingness to change his mind and to think differently. And one of the things that I was really thinking through with him and talking through with him is this idea that why we, and by we I mean him, feel so feel like we're in the position to speak to the experience of someone who is totally different than us, right? And like we were having this conversation about I forgot her name, the Harry Potter author, and I was like, she like
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, and I haven't even gotten to like the depths of what really happened there, but I'm like, if you're not a trans person, why have so much skin in the game of being the person that decides what they're experiencing is? Right? If you're not a Black person, why defend so strongly your certainty of what that experience is, right? Like, you get to be who you are, and you can speak to your experience. And just that like really like, I think it like unlocked something in him that he was like, you know what, you're right. And I think that like those are the kinds of conversations that we can continue to have and hold them high, because you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, as we've been talking about, you also get to decide who you engage in this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? If having, oh, we're getting lots of hearts and claps is what we're getting. But if we're having these kinds of conversations with somebody who is continually, you're feeling like they're not respecting your boundaries and they're not really there for you, then you can bow out and you can just say, hey, these are my boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're ready to respect them, like, I'm happy to engage with you again, but I'm not going to be putting myself through this. And also remembering that there's like a whole bunch more people who are actually open and ready to have conversations that are respectful and kind with you. And so why not, like, why keep insisting with the people where it's toxic, where like you can shift, right? That you have the power to do that.
And you know, the other thing is, I think for family, friends, like, it's like, how much do I care about you? Like, there's this idea of like the circle of human concern, right? Everybody's got their own circle and who's in it and who's out of it.
Yeah.
Right? So anybody that's in my circle of human concern, then these are people who represent somebody that I'm willing to invest in you and invest the time. So you can be a family member and I love you, right? Because I love my family. I don't like all of them, but I love them, right? So you are worth something to me, and you are worth my time, right? To me, this is me saying. So the other thing that has been really useful to me is taking a second and asking them about themselves, right? Let's not deal with this thing right now. Tell me your story. Tell me about when you were younger. Tell me about your experience, right? I've had to let a lot of things go with family members, because then I learn about their story, and then it's almost like children, right? Like early childhood development. When I learned how children's brains work and why they do the things they do, I was like, oh, there's nothing a kid could really do to irritate me, because I know exactly what's happening right now. So it's something similar to that when I learn your history, right? When I realize that like some of the things that somebody says in anger, when I'm just like, ooh, what kind of terrible person are you? Then I get to hear all the stories about times when people were terrible to them.
Yeah.
And when all they experienced for a really long time and in their formative years were people being terrible to them because of their skin color, because of who they were, because they resented, whatever the reasons are. And so if I've learned that sometimes hurt people,
yes.
And then I can see, right? So then, I can, and you know, I love analogies, right? So then somebody might say something, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I'm like, you know, when I hear you say that story, it makes me think of a friend of mine who told me about their story. And part of the reason why I struggle so much when you say these things about these people is that in my mind and in my body, it's the same exact thing. Everything that you just described about that time when somebody hurt you, or that time when you struggled or when you were unsure, is something that this other person that you decided that you don't think is a person has expressed to me.
Yeah.
And you guys both represent the same thing to me. And so when I ask you to not talk about X, Y, and Z that way, that is why I'm asking, because there's somebody in my life that I love almost as much as I love you, that is causing the same pain that you were caused in that moment.
Yes.
So you may get the opportunity to say something like that.
Yeah.
But that also helps you understand where to pick and choose and how to connect the dots for people, or how to let them off the hook, and how to just kind of put a line and be like, all right, but if the conversation gets to that place, we can't go any further, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And as you're speaking, one of my favorite sort of insights coming into conversations that might be conflictive is about this idea of you and me against the problem as opposed to you and me against each other. And I think that this speaks to very much the power of intention. And so like if I'm walking in there with an intention of finding common ground, with an intention of opening ourselves up, like both of us, to listening to someone else's experience with respect and with kindness, and sort of reaching that goal that we have for the conversation, that I feel like sometimes we underestimate how powerful we can be in just mirroring that for someone else. Because one of the things that like we live every day in the Kamala's community is that you might walk into a space and not have any idea, and all of a sudden like 5 or 6 other people are like incredibly vulnerable, and you find yourself like crying and sharing something, and you didn't realize that was going to happen. But it's just the how we're wired as humans, and that we're wired for that kind of connection. And if we see a space where that is happening and we feel like we can also be part of it, we probably will, even if that goes against what you think that person's character is, right? Even if you think that person's like would never do something like that we have the power to mirror that for people, and we have the power to not only mirror the openness and the vulnerability, but the intention with which it happens.
And so sometimes for me, it's rooted in this question of what if it were true? What would I do differently, right? And so, you know, because as right and true, and I believe I am right about almost everything, right? As firm as I am in that, my opponents, the people who think opposite to me, are as firm in their beliefs as can be as firm in their beliefs, right?
Yes.
And you're not gonna convince me out of mine.
Yes.
Right? And so then what do?
Yeah.
What are we gonna do? We're standing across from each other. What are we going to do? And so I just ask people to take on my, you can't argue with my story, first of all. You ain't arguing with me about it, at least. But I need you to consider, what would you do in your life if what I'm saying is true?
Yes.
And that's all I'm asking of anybody.
Consider the possibility. And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure to make a very intentional part of this conversation, and I think it was interesting how you really spelled out that literally the word facilitate is to make easier, because at the same time, what we have all been processing and experiencing over the past 5 weeks or so is incredibly heavy. And it is a reality that Black people have lived with every day, and all of a sudden kind of like all the rest of us are like, oh my God, that's real, and it's really heavy. And so I want to talk about, and I know that this is something that you like to talk about, I want to talk about your self-care. And I want to talk about, like, I just really want to talk about, because I feel like it is an important piece of this conversation. It's an important part of life. But we get to normalize self-care and celebrate it and understand that it isn't this like nice Instagram hashtag, but that this is real. Especially going through what we're going through and going through our processes. I've heard of people like getting physically ill a lot lately, like beyond the pandemic and what's going on. It's just like our bodies are processing all of these new feelings and realizations and emotions, and also engaging in interactions that aren't always like pleasant, right? And so what does self-care look like in your life? I feel like it could inspire a lot of us. So
I don't know how inspirational it's going to be, because I got to work as hard at self-care as other people going to have to work at having hard conversations, right? This is my evidence that I do not have enough self-care practice. But I know that I do better when I'm engaging with other people, right? I'm more stable around my family. So I go and I be around my family. I love being around children. So I try, even though, I had a baby overnight the other day, and I was like, it's time for you to go home. But I've I'm blessed to have friends who are invested in my self-care. And so I just do what they say.
That's a great strategy.
A friend of mine started a journaling group, and so I start each morning with journaling, and that has been so freeing. Like, I'm able to take everything that's in here and dump it,
yes,
let it out, and that's led to me getting back to writing in a way that I hadn't been able to even just sit down and do anything for a while.
Yes.
I cleaned up my sleep hygiene. I'm not as consistent with it as I feel like I should be, but
that's important.
I only go to bed with my journal and with my, I try to only go to bed with my journal and my planner. And
Meaning no phone.
Huh?
Meaning no phone.
Yeah, I also got paper problems, so I love paper. So I can't tell anybody that
It's a great problem to have.
But, you know, I know that I got to have the machines elsewhere because, you know, I will, if I stir a little bit and I see a phone, I'm like, oh, what's happening on Facebook? Let me watch something on YouTube. And so I just go through the next day. I write down things that I forgot. I journal if anything is coming to me, and then I put them down. Once I get sleepy, I try to read a couple pages of something, and then I go to sleep. And I slept for 7 hours the first time I did this. I can count on less than this many fingers how many straight 7 hours of sleep I've gotten in my adult life.
Wow.
I'm a 5-hour girl.
Wow.
And I slept for 7 hours, and I was like, I feel amazing.
Good.
So little things like that, just like keeping a routine, trying to stay in touch with people and listening to people, because I've learned that like the people around me notice things that I don't notice, and I just listen when they talk. Yeah. I say, what if it were true? And what would I do differently?
Yes.
And then that's what I try to do. So that's my self-care is trying to be less stubborn about what somebody may have noticed about the things that I might need in a moment. Yes. And to try to just say yes more.
Yes, let people help you. That's a huge part of it. That's a huge part of it. And I love it because it's also just very much related about this whole conversation, like how we are in community with each other, how we honor each other, how we move forward, because these kinds of transformational conversations are going to be a big part of how this isn't just a moment, and that this really shifts the consciousness collectively of where we're all at. So I just want to thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. And it's even just like lots of thoughts that I needed to get out of my head and express as well.
Good.
So I really thank you for the opportunity. It was very nourishing.
It was our pleasure, my dear. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Las Comadres is a community of entrepreneurial women reclaiming sisterhood and uplifting each other in life and in business. Music for the Las Comadres podcast provided by Afro Beta. Learn more about our community and join us at lascomadres.club.